Hi guys, we've got like 9 more slides. 9 more slides to get through for this unit. I do have my daughter here, so I'm hoping she won't interrupt as I try to finish up this last little bit of lecture for Unit 6. We left off talking about some of the issues that cities have with sustainability, and making cities places that people want to be. Beyond just what they can offer, but actually, good quality of life, and their efforts to try to minimize some of the drawbacks of urban living. And so that brings up this idea of inclusionary zoning is what it's called. And inclusionary zoning is basically the idea of requiring developers and construction, real estate developers, construction companies, to build housing, usually apartments, that is in some way like rent controlled, or it's can only be so expensive, in an effort to kind of go the opposite way of exclusionary zoning, right? Exclusionary zoning would be things like redlining and stuff like that. Inclusionary zoning, we're going to set rent at a certain level and it can't go above this. We're going to market to everybody, and anyone who can make the rent is available to live there, in an effort to, diversify neighborhoods, make sure that we have quality housing available to everyone, whether they can, pay a super high price for city living or not. Because nice apartments downtown are expensive. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world are going to be in like city, high desirable neighborhoods in cities. So inclusionary zoning often requires private companies to build, apartment buildings or whatever, housing, and not necessarily take a loss, like they're not going to make any money, but to sort of limit the amount of money that they make, because rent is set at a certain limit, the mortgage is set at a certain limit, right? And so inclusionary zoning often is going to require government subsidies in order for those construction companies to want to do it, because if they're not going to make any money, what's in it for them? What's in it for them, right? And so it's really kind of an effort between local governments and private firms, construction real estate firms, to kind of work together in an effort to provide housing for everyone of all, socioeconomic backgrounds, of all, demographics, etc. But some people complain that it's actually bad for the economy, that limiting the price that you can charge for highly desirable housing is, cutting off capitalism. It's, not allowing the developers to make profit. And so it's actually, not good, and requiring people to provide inclusionary housing, and build inclusionary housing, actually tends to limit the amount of housing that is built, because, developers can only build so much without making profit off of it. And so they don't build as much as they maybe would otherwise. So housing actually ends up being more scarce, which actually drives the prices up. So it's almost like a catch-22, right? Like, you do it because you want to provide affordable housing, but when you do it, you're limiting the housing that's available and the housing that's being built, and so you're actually driving prices up anyway. So there's a lot of kind of finesse that goes into inclusionary housing, and lots of cities across the country do it lots of different ways. That article that is linked right there is a good one if you want to learn more about inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning. It's also called inclusionary housing. Better understand kind of why and what the arguments are around that. Another thing that we run into is something called gentrification. And gentrification is this new trend, and by new I mean like last maybe 30 to 40 years, where private developers are going into inner cities and looking at old buildings, warehouses, old factories, maybe rundown but historic type of, houses, and they are buying them up and they are refurbishing them, renovating them, and then selling them to upper or middle income Americans who want to move back into the city center. So it's great in terms of, getting people back into the city, rehabbing those areas, preserving the architecture in the neighborhood.
Why are you wandering down?
Here's my daughter. Hold on just a second. What do you need, baby? You did more numbers. Good job. Okay, my mom is making a video. And these tend to be very desirable types of places because it gets people back into the neighborhood. Much of this area is going to be like loft type of living, or really cool architecture that's being preserved and refurbished. And so you end up having 4-ish groups of people moving back into the city center. So these are all kind of nicknames for groups of people. So the yuppies are the people who value the benefits of city life and are kind of elitist about it, like they live in the city, right? They want to be close to restaurants, the nightlife. They like, having close access to all the things they do. They like being close to where they work. They probably don't drive a car because they don't need one because of public transport. Sinks are single income, no kids. So, single people who don't really have any roots tied down, like to be where the action is kind of people. Dinks would be like couples who are newly married, dual income, no kids. So they, make a fairly good living. They want to be close to where they work. They don't necessarily need a big yard for, kids to running around in because they don't have kids. And then empty nesters, those who have raised their kids, lived in the suburbs for, probably decades, and are looking to downsize, want to be closer to, things to do. And so they want to move back into the city. These tend to be the 4 groups we see with gentrification. However, are downsides to gentrification. So here's our definition: the process of converting an urban neighborhood from predominantly low-income renter-occupied areas to predominantly middle-class owner-occupied areas. So it's, bringing people back into the neighborhood to reinvest in it, to, people who own something tend to take better care of it, tends to be better maintained. They tend to participate more in the community and community efforts and organizations, whereas renters tend to not. They're more transient. They don't necessarily put roots down. They really don't have any incentive to take really good care of the property. They don't necessarily get involved in the community because they assume that they won't be there for very long, right? And so we tend to prefer owner-occupied areas. You have a better atmosphere in the neighborhood of owner-occupied areas than renter-occupied areas. And so gentrification does bring owners back into the area. And gentrification is attractive. People like it because of these 4 reasons. Houses tend to be larger and better constructed. Houses possess some of that character and charm that a lot of people are looking for. Eliminates the commute for people who work in the central business district. Leisure services are close. Theaters, restaurants, stadiums, etc. However, I guess I don't have a however slide in here. The however is when gentrification happens, what often coincides with that is the housing prices go up. Okay, housing prices go up because, it's a brand new, rehab of the house. You're still close to lots of those really great amenities that people like to be close to: restaurants, bars, clubs, maybe sports venues, stuff like that. However, the people who live in these neighborhoods, when they almost have the potential of getting priced out of their neighborhood, because as prices go up in the neighborhood, that means that the other properties are now more desirable. Their price, when prices go up in the neighborhood, it helps everybody in terms of property value. All of the property value goes up, even the ones for the places that haven't been redone. And when that happens, the owners who are renting, right, to the people who are renting, they think they can charge more rent. And so they often will raise the rent on the people, even though the people have maybe been there for years in some cases. They will raise the rent and potentially even price people out of their home, somewhere they've lived for years. When that happens, there tends to be a shift in the demographics.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Because typically when you look at urban people who live in a city center or close to a city center in a renter-occupied place, those tend to be more of your minority groups, your Hispanics, African Americans, Asian Americans in some cases. When it goes toward becoming owner-occupied and those prices go up, guess which ethnicity tends to be the ones to move in? They tend to be more Caucasian Americans, European Americans, not always. But what ends up happening is people who have lived there for years, who tend to be of a more diverse background, end up getting priced out of their neighborhood, and it changes the entire kind of cultural makeup of the area. Kind of a different take on, I don't want to say segregation because it's not segregation, but when you are pricing people out of their home, a home that they've lived in for years, in favor of, someone else coming in who can pay more, and that someone else tends to be a different race or a different ethnicity, you start to see those patterns and those trends. The other thing that happens is when we start seeing gentrified neighborhoods, the people who are the renter, or the people who are the owners that are renting out their property, they're like, oh, I can get a lot more money for this property than I thought I could. And so they sometimes consider selling. And so they'll sell their property out from underneath their renters, and their renters then can't afford to stay in the neighborhood. And so they have to go somewhere else. We see that happening a lot with gentrified neighborhoods as well. There is always a however. Okay, government. Governing cities is tricky. There's a lot of things to consider when you have to govern in a city. And so we see fragmentation amongst governing cities. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But functional and geographic fragmentation of governments presents challenges in addressing urban issues. So for example, let's look at the Salt Lake Valley. Salt Lake Valley includes lots of towns, right? You've got Salt Lake City, Murray, you've got North Salt Lake, South Salt Lake, Taylorsville, everybody on the west side, West Valley, Kearns, Magna, and then you go south, we've got Sandy, Draper, obviously us, we're out here in Bluffdale and Riverton and Harriman, and that's not all of them, but there's a lot of towns that make up the Salt Lake Valley, okay? So Salt Lake County and Salt Lake Valley tend to be pretty close to the same. So the Salt Lake County has a mayor, right? We have a county mayor. We also have individual mayors for all of these places. Sorry, my daughter is dancing and singing around. Individual mayors for all of these different towns. And so for issues that affect multiple people, multiple different municipalities, things can be a little tricky in terms of coordination, right? So you're looking at things like environmental concerns, maybe snow removal, right? If you've got one road that goes through multiple cities, the, maintaining of that road, the infrastructure of that road, lights and, concrete or asphalt, street signs, street lights, painting, striping on the roads, all of that has to be coordinated amongst multiple government entities, right? Let's think of Bangor, right? So Bangor goes from Draper into Bluffdale, into Riverton, into it doesn't go into, it does go into Harriman, South Jordan, West Jordan, right? We could just keep going all the way up. Multiple different multiple different cities, plus Salt Lake County, that have to coordinate in the maintaining of Bangor Highway. So other multiple government agencies that we see, the DMV, needing to get your car registered with the state, registered with the federal government, needing to get a passport, needing, let's see, what else? I'm trying to think. Car insurance often involves government agencies. What, baby? It's garbage. Can you just throw it away for Mama? But there are multiple
Mama,
different examples.
I have pictures of you, me, and Dad.
Because that's our family, and I like having pictures of our family in my room. And so, education is another one, right? Where you've got, let's look at Riverton High School. There are students who attend Riverton High School who live in multiple different cities, etc. North Star Academy, we're a government agency. We're located in Bluffdale. We're a public school, but we have kids that come here from, Saratoga and Eagle Mountain and Riverton and Harriman and Bluffdale and Draper and all over. Trying to coordinate multiple agencies with one particular thing can be really difficult. And that is part of why we see some inefficiencies in our government organizations. So dysfunction, inefficiencies, dysfunction, pretty much the same thing. Annexing suburban communities is difficult. As a result, local government is extremely fragmented. This makes it difficult to solve regional traffic issues, address solid waste disposal, right? Sewer issues, build affordable housing, because we are all operating independently, but also collaboratively at the same time. And so it's hard to figure out who's in charge of what and who's going to pay for what and who's going to be in charge of making sure it happens and where the oversight is, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a mess. What some areas have found to be successful is something called a council of government, which is a consolidation of city and county government federations. So what they'll do is they will find, the issues that are reaching beyond the city limits, right, that go into multiple municipalities, and they will take representatives from each of the people or each of the areas that are going to be affected and put them onto almost like a task force of sorts. So you guys are in charge of these things because these are the things that impact both cities and the county. And so we're going to have you work together as one body to be over these things. That has proved sort of successful.
Mom, I get to bring my lunchbox.
In case you need snacks.
I need snacks.
All right, eat some snacks. But again, trying to figure out who's in charge of what. In some cases, it's a too many cooks in the kitchen kind of situation, where lots of people want to be in charge of things and are fighting over them, right? Or disagreeing over things.
Pretzel.
All right, eat your pretzels. That we see
Mama.
This dysfunction.
So, Mom,
What, baby?
we get to come nap time at daycare.
I know. So you haven't taken a nap. Do you need a nap?
No.
You sure?
I'm not tired.
All right. Okay, last topic of our of our unit. Challenges of urban sustainability. So our learning objective, describe the effectiveness of different attempts to address urban sustainability challenges. So these are some of the things that are happening in these categories. Energy and land use tend to be the most important things. Hold on, I've got Miss Stewart coming in. Yeah.
You finished doing what you need to do.
Oh, I'm recording a video for my sub tomorrow.
Okay, sorry. Did you give this to us when we did that?
Uh-uh.
Okay, I didn't think so. This is in one of my close reading files, and I'm like, that is so crazy. I know this story. You did it with us, but I was like, ooh, some of these are really good. And
Nice.
I don't want it for my class because I've never done this story
I'll
in my
take it.
class. So I went, huh.
Awesome. I'll take it. Thank you. Okay, so urban sustainability. Energy and land use are big ones. So for energy, on the energy side, how much does the population, hold on, an industrial concentration require? And the answer is a lot. We are very reliant on our gas and our coal, those fossil fuels, very, very, very reliant on them. Where there are industrial buildings and people, there is pollution. So we see an increase in greenhouse gases, an increase in acid rain, an increase in the ozone depletion. Our carbon footprint is forever increasing, right? We are continuing to utilize fossil fuels at an alarming rate. And we are seeing it more so in the developing countries because they're still in the process of industrialization. They're still in the process of being able to manufacture their own goods and set up a manufacturing industry in their countries. So they really don't care much about whether or not they are polluting the air or the water or whatever. They are more concerned about making money and about providing food and jobs for the people in their country. In developed countries, we tend to be a little bit more concerned about the environment, in so much that we are actually making concerted policy efforts to protect the environment. On the land use side, suburban sprawl is becoming a big deal. The spreading out of developments like housing development, shopping centers into suburban and rural areas. With an increase in urban areas, there is a decrease in available agricultural land, right? That sprawl has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is taking away from farmable, usable land. So what are the answers? The answers are planning, basically. Making better decisions in how we use our resources. This is remediation and redevelopment of brownfields. This picture over here is a brownfield. I need you to know this term. A brownfield is an area that for whatever reason was condemned, often due to like toxic waste spillage or, something that poisoned the land in some way, some sort of groundwater pollution, something like that. Brownfield redevelopment and remediation basically means we're going to go in, we're going to clean up that area, we're going to get rid of all of the stuff that is bad for people, and then we're going to beautify it. We're going to make it nice again. And so that's your before and after picture of that same area. The after looks way nicer than the before. Establishment of urban growth boundaries. So those smart growth and slow growth, which we talked about before, being very specific in preserving agricultural land and saying, okay, we can only go this far, or you can only develop so much, or you can only add so many houses, or you need to make sure that any new development you add is already connected to the existing development. You're not going to go like 2 miles out and build something new and then build one little road to get out there, which is what happens a lot actually. And then farmland protection policy is just making sure we are preserving and protecting the farmland that we're still utilizing. We don't want to build over the top of stuff that is being productive. Okay, so these are just overall terms for chapter 13 specifically. Making sure you know all of these models is going to be important. Making sure you understand central place and the terms that go with it, threshold, range, hinterland, those terms. Edge cities is going to be part of that, as a discussion of suburbanization and an extension of some of your original city models. De facto ethnic and racial segregation is common in urban areas, although discriminatory practice in real estate and urban planning is illegal. And the examples we see of that are redlining, blockbusting, white flight, Today we talked about gentrification and how that can actually have sort of an unintended consequence, right? Nobody goes in thinking, oh yeah, we're gonna clean up the neighborhood and that's gonna force all of the people out. That's not ever necessarily the intent. Clean up the neighborhood, make it nicer so people wanna move there is the intent. But you end up with the alternate as well, right? People wanna move there, and people want people to move there who are gonna pay more, which means they're gonna force out the people that are already there. Yeah, so anyway, the whole next paragraph is about gentrification. Gentrification occurs when existing urban areas receive economic reinvestment. While it can help revitalize many neighborhoods that suffered after deindustrialization, many low-income and elderly residents are driven out of those areas when housing becomes unaffordable because of the new upgrades that have been made to the area. And then economic and environmental sustainability has become a major concern amid population booms in both cities and suburbs. The development of mass transit and new downtown housing. New downtown housing is also often tied to urbanization or to gentrification. Has helped to some extent by cutting down suburban sprawl and auto traffic. Not enough, right? We always want to make it better to live in cities. I thought the quote, I can't remember which TED Talk it was from, but the whole idea of the trouble with sustainability is that you have to sustain it. I thought that was funny and very accurate, right? Okay, you guys should have everything you need to know. Yeah, I think that's it for the day. I will see you on Thursday. You have a Unit 6. Your Unit 6 test is on Thursday. I hope you did well on your quizzes today. Unit 6 test on Thursday. Okay, I will talk to you guys later.